when we talk about Soviet repression, your mind probably goes straight to 1937, 1938, right? Those infamous years, the trials, the purges.
Yeah, that's the standard picture.
But what if that picture, the one we all sort of accept, is actually, well, incomplete? What if those 2 years were just, peaks in something much more relentless, much more pervasive, and honestly, much longer lasting?
Well, our source material for this deep dive, it actually uses this really chilling phrase. It talks about the history of our sewage disposal system.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty vivid metaphor, isn't it, for this continuous, murky, constant flow of people through the Soviet prison system, the Gulag Archipelago. So what we're doing here is challenging that common narrative. We're revealing a process of arrests that wasn't just like peaks and troughs, but constant, always evolving, spanning decades.
That's right. So our mission really is to unpack these overlooked waves, this ever-widening net, and some of the truly shocking methods they used to fill the archipelago. We want to show you a system that was always working, always hungry for more victims. Get ready to understand, maybe in a new way, what it really meant to be called an enemy of the people back then.
Okay, so let's start digging into that common misconception you mentioned. Our collective memory seems kind of stuck on 37 and 38.
It really does.
But our sources are suggesting these years were, and I'm quoting here, neither the only one nor even the main one. Maybe just one of the three biggest waves.
Yeah.
So what were these other huge waves we don't really hear about?
Yeah, and this is where it gets really fascinating, how history gets told and, crucially, who gets to tell it.
Right.
So before 1937, you had this immense wave, 1929 and 1930. Our source likens it to a good river ob, a huge river.
Okay.
And this wave, it was driven by collectivization, and it pushed, estimates are staggering, 15 million peasants, maybe even more, out into the wilderness, the taiga and the tundra.
15 million.
Yeah. And it's largely forgotten. Why? Because these peasants, they were, quote, silent people without a literary voice. They didn't write complaints. They didn't write memoirs.
No record, effectively. Very little. And the source makes this profound point. Stalin, and you and I as well, committed no crime more heinous than this. It's powerful stuff.
Wow.
Then, after 37, you get another massive influx. The Good Yenisei, another river metaphor, from 1944 to 1946.
Right after the war.
Exactly. This swept up whole nations, millions of repatriated prisoners of war. They were just dumped into these, quote, sewer pipes. And again, they wrote no memoirs.
So silenced again.
Right. But compare that to 1937.
Wow.
That wave is remembered because it caught, people of position, people with a party pass, yes,
Yeah.
educated people. There were others around them in the cities who remembered, who survived, and crucially, had pen in hand. And today, they're the ones writing, speaking, remembering.
So it's a really sobering thought, isn't it, that the stories we hear are shaped pretty much entirely by who is left and who is able to tell them?
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how this whole sewage disposal system, as the source calls it, how it even got started.
Well, the key thing to grasp is the sheer continuity. The Soviet security organs, or organs, which, as the source notes, is a pretty vile word they chose for themselves.
Yeah, it is.
Their constant activity just ensured the prison sewers were never empty. Their history is one of endless swallow and flow. It wasn't just bursts of activity.
Yearning.
Always. Look, even before the Civil War really kicked off, November 1917, the dictatorship immediately went after the cadets, the Constitutional Democratic Party, outlawed them as most dangerous ranks of reaction.
Right, or...
Right away. The Cheka, the security police, they quickly started arresting entire committees of employee unions. And the NKVD, in December 1917, they explicitly ordered maximum initiative in localities, not excluding confiscations, compulsion, and arrests against any sabotage by officials.
So the net was cast incredibly wide from the very beginning, not just, obvious political opponents, but it wasn't just about formal parties or officials, was it? Our source talks about Lenin having this even broader, more insidious term for threats.
Yes, that's right. What's really fascinating and quite chilling is Lenin's concept of harmful insects from early 1918.
Harmful insects.
Yeah. And this term, it wasn't just for traditional class enemies. It covered workers malingering at their work, like typesetters in party printing shops who weren't working hard enough.
Seriously.
Seriously. And the ways of dealing with these insects, the forms of insect purging, were varied and pretty shocking. Arrest, cleaning latrines, getting a yellow ticket, or even just being shot.
My goodness.
And the definition was just incredibly broad. It covered people in local government, the Zemstvos, people in the cooperative movements, all owners of their own homes, teachers, church councils, church choirs, all priests, monks, nuns.
Just kept going.
It kept going. Yeah. Tolstoyans who wouldn't sign an oath to defend the government with guns, even railroad workers and telegraphers if they showed no sympathy for the Soviets.
Yeah.
It also included, disturbingly, restless students, eccentrics, and truth seekers.
That's a staggering range. It's almost arbitrary, isn't it? How could they even process this hygienic purging without any kind of normal legal framework? That must have made it terrifyingly efficient.
Well, that's the thing. An entirely new form was adopted. Extrajudicial reprisal. No courts needed, really. The Cheka, as the source puts it rather sarcastically, self-sacrificingly assumed this thankless job.
Meaning
They combined everything. Investigation, arrest, interrogation, prosecution, trial, and execution of the verdict.
Yeah.
All in one pair of hands.
Judge, jury, and executioner, literally.
Pretty much. This covered things like ransacking churches in 1918 that led to popular disorders where, true Orthodox believers rushed forth. Some had to be, quote, expended right on the spot, others arrested.
Just shot down.
Yes. And maybe most disturbing was the widespread practice of taking hostages. Tens of thousands of them. These were people not personally accused of anything, just peaceful citizens, not even listed by name.
Why? Just for terror.
Exactly.
Yep.
Simply to terrorize or wreak vengeance. There's an example from February 1919. Peasants taken hostage and shot because they failed to clear snow from railroad tracks.
Just for snow. It sounds like the system's, well, it's genius, if you can call it that, was that it just kept expanding who could be swept up. It wasn't just about dealing with actual threats. It was creating a perpetual need for victims.
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
By the spring of 1918, you get a torrent of socialist traitors, socialist revolutionaries, Mensheviks, anarchists, these groups who, had actually been revolutionaries for decades.
Right. Against the Tsar.
Exactly. Now they were suddenly deemed to have a bourgeois essence. Arrests just escalated, especially after June 1918. Even worker protests like strikes in Petrograd and Moscow in March 1921, they didn't lead to open confrontation, but to silent nighttime arrests of Mensheviks and SRs.
Keep them away quietly.
Yes. And there's this chilling quote from Lazys, a top Jikist, in 1920. He says, "We remove them from our path so they won't get under our feet. We put them away in a secluded, cozy place in the Butyrka, a famous Moscow prison, and we are going to keep them there until the struggle between capital and labor comes to an end."
A secluded, cozy place, but with a time frame linked to the end of global capitalism. That sounds less like a temporary measure and more like a very strategic long-term plan. You mentioned this grand solitaire game.
It was exactly that. The source calls it a grand solitaire game, and its rules were totally incomprehensible to its contemporaries. The real goal, the imperceptible and merciless annihilation of people who had, ironically, once raged against tyranny.
How did the game work?
Well, this solitaire involved offering old political prisoners, especially SRs and anarchists, a chance to publicly renounce their parties in writing.
A loyalty test?
Sort of. Those who refused, they were first for annihilation.
Yeah.
Those who signed, they didn't really escape. They just added a few years to their lifetimes, but their turn too came implacably.
No way out, really?
Pretty much. And the bitter irony, as the writer Korolenko pointed out back in 1921, was that the Bolshevik Revolution used the same means to deal with true revolutionaries and socialists as did the Tsarist regime. In other words, purely police measures.
So the revolutionaries became the counter-revolutionaries, targeted by the same methods. What about intellectuals? They're often seen as, the conscience of a nation, maybe harder to just sweep away.
Well, after 1922, the source uses this incredibly brutal phrase. It says, elements of the intelligentsia considered close to the cadets were raped into prison.
That's a violent image.
It really conveys the force, the violation involved. And this is a broad category. All scientific circles, all university circles, or artistic, literary, yes, and of course all engineering circles. Basically, this source estimates 80% of the intelligentsia.
80.
Yeah. And Lenin himself, he thought a writer like Korolenko, whom he called a pitiful petty bourgeois, just needed a few weeks in prison. When Maxim Gorky protested about treatment of intellectuals, Lenin just dismissed him, told him not to waste your energy whimpering over rotten intellectuals.
So contempt from the very top. It wasn't just political enemies or intellectuals then. Even simple economic acts, things people did just to survive, could get you arrested.
Absolutely. Look, the state was reorganizing. There was widespread poverty, shortages. Naturally, theft and speculation increased.
People trying to get by.
Exactly. And even though these acts weren't really a threat to the state's existence, they were repressed harshly. And the waves of these prisoners just served to swell the waves of counter-revolutionaries.
Blurring the lines.
Completely. For instance, a decree from Lenin in July 1918. It made it punishable by at least 10 years, plus severe forced labor and confiscation of all property. For what? For peasants keeping grain back for sale in the way of business, just trying to trade. This led to peasant revolts, which were then suppressed, leading to an abundant flood of arrests. The source just laments, the hardest working sector of the nation was positively uprooted. Which brings us back to those massive peasant waves you mentioned earlier. How did the regime actually manage to uproot millions so completely, yet, as you said, keep it largely hidden from the cities? Well, the prime example is that multi-million wave of dispossessed kulaks from 1929 to 1930. Our source calls it immeasurably large, an ocean of people, and significantly, they often bypass the prisons entirely.
Straight to the camps.
Straight to transit camps, straight to the Gulag. It was, quote, the forced resettlement of a whole people, an ethnic catastrophe. And it was organized so cleverly, apparently, that the cities would have noticed nothing had they not been stricken by a strange 3-year famine, a famine that came about without drought and without war.
A famine caused by removing the farmers.
Precisely. And this wave was unique because it burned out whole nests, whole families from the start. Children weren't spared. None of the children, 14, 10, even 6 years old, got away.
6 years old.
Yeah. The source calls this the first such experiment, at least in modern history, something later repeated by Hitler with the Jews, and again by Stalin with nationalities.
Chilling comparison. And that term kulak, it wasn't just a specific group anymore, was it? It sounds like they deliberately stretched the definition.
Oh, absolutely. That's what's really unsettling, the inflation of the term. Originally, yeah, it meant a miserly, dishonest, rural trader.
So, okay, specific.
But it came to mean all strong peasants in general. Strong how? Strong in management, strong in work, or even strong merely in convictions. It was basically used to smash the strength of the peasantry.
Anyone successful or independent.
Exactly. But it went even further. They also targeted peasants who showed an aversion to joining the collective farms. Or maybe they were just favorites with their fellow villagers because they were independent thinkers. Or sometimes they just personally gotten in the way of the local activists.
So personal grudges could play a role.
Absolutely. And this led to this other term, podkolaknik. It means a person aiding the kulaks. But the source stresses this term had no social or economic content whatsoever. It just meant, I consider you an accomplice of the enemy, and that finishes you.
Guilt by association, essentially.
Or just accusation. Between kulak and podkolaknik, these terms embraced everything that constituted the essence of the village. Its energy, its keenness of wit, its love of hard work, its resistance, and its conscience. They were simply torn up by the roots.
So the sewage system, it seems, always needed new material, even after tearing out the heart of the peasantry. How did they keep finding new enemies, like these wreckers everywhere?
Well, after collectivization basically decimated agriculture, suddenly a wave of agricultural wreckers appeared. Agronomists were accused of purposely sowing weeds in the collective fields.
Purposely sowing weeds?
Yeah. It even extended to those who actually followed the crazy directives, from figures like Lysenko, like sowing flax on snow. Of course, the seeds died. But who got blamed? The agronomists, labeled kulaks, sent to Siberia.
It's Kafkaesque.
It really is. Then there was the notorious Law of August 7th, 1932. In prison, they called it the Law of 7/8.
Why that name?
August 7th, 78. Anyway, this law produced another huge wave. Tens of thousands of peasants got 10 years for especially dangerous theft of socialist property.
What counted as especially dangerous theft?
Sometimes just sniffing years, which meant starving peasants, including children, going out at night to collect individual ears of grain left in the fields. 10 years for that.
Unbelievable. And it wasn't just about grain, was it? The state needed other things, gold, for instance. How did that feed the system?
Precisely. By late 1929, this gold fever started. The prisons were packed again, but the main goal wasn't necessarily sending people to the Gulag right away.
Yeah.
It was about extracting gold by force.
How?
They arrested anyone who, at one time or another, could have hoarded gold, even if they swore they had nothing left.
Yeah.
The interrogators had this universal method, apparently quite simple. Feed the prisoners nothing but salty food and give them no water.
Torture, basically.
Pure torture. Whoever coughed up gold got water. 1 gold piece for a cup of fresh water. The source just states chillingly, people perish for cold metal.
God. Is there an example?
Yes, a vivid one. A Tatar drayman. He endured terrible tortures, didn't give in.
Yeah.
Then they arrested his wife. Still nothing. Then his daughter. Finally, he broke. He coughed up 100,000 rubles in gold.
And his family.
They were released. But he still got a prison term. The source notes it was like detective stories and operas about brigands were played out in real life on a vast national scale.
So, beyond the economic drivers, this was fundamentally about control, wasn't it? Creating this pervasive fear, ensuring compliance across the board. How did they manage that?
Well, by 1927, you could feel a new tension building.
Yeah.
It was framed as the threshold of a war for world revolution. And this gave rise to a new concept, social prophylaxis.
Prophylaxis.
Yeah.
Like disease prevention.
Exactly. A convenient juridical term, the source calls it. The idea was, let's arrest the unreliable fellow travelers, all that shaky intellectual rot, before any potential war or major conflict breaks out. Preventative arrests.
Pre-crime, almost.
Kind of. This led to systematic block-by-block searches in Moscow. The slogan was apparently, we are going to bang our fist on the table so hard that the world will shake with terror.
Openly declared terror.
Yes. And then you had the public show trials. The Shakti case in 28, the Prom Party or Industrial Party trial in 1930. These were, quote, faultlessly rehearsed, defendants making startling confessions.
But these were just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. Just the surface indications of the mole's tunnel. Only a small number of those arrested actually ended up in these public trials, mainly those who agreed to confess. Most engineers, for example, who refused to play along were tried in secret, but they got the same harsh sentences anyway.
And the public, they weren't just passive observers, were they? It sounds like the system actually forced them to participate in this charade.
It absolutely demanded participation. The source calls it a very far-sighted step, universal participation in sewage disposal. Ordinary citizens were forced to march up above, carrying banners, praising the trials, and rejoicing at the judicial reprisal.
Praising show trials.
Yes. During one trial in 1930, about supposed famine organizers, workers were made to watchfully voted for the death penalty for the scoundrels on trial before the court had even given a verdict.
Voting for execution beforehand.
Yeah. By the time of the property trial, you had universal meetings and demonstrations, including even school children. Imagine kids being marched out to chant for death. The roar outside the courtrooms was apparently death, death, death.
Chilling. What happened if someone refused to participate?
Well, the source highlights the immense bravery needed for even lonely voices of protest or abstention. It gives the example of Professor Dmitry Rosansky. At a meeting, he abstained from a vote demanding capital punishment. He was arrested on the spot.
Just for abstaining.
Just for abstaining. Thus, all these protests were silenced at the very source.
Which brings us, I suppose, to the legal tool that enabled all this. Article 58 of the 1926 Criminal Code. It seems like this single article was the linchpin, the all-encompassing embrace for decades of repression.
It really was astonishing. And the key thing isn't just how broad it was, but how it provided this sort of legal cover for what was essentially arbitrary state power. It made everyone a potential target.
And it wasn't even officially called a political crime.
No. It was categorized under crime against public order and organized gangsterism. But as our source says, there is no step, thought, action, or lack of action under the heavens which should not be punished by the heavy hand of Article 58.
Let's try and unpack that a bit, because its power seems to lie in those interpretations.
Okay, let's break down some key sections, because this is crucial.
Right.
Take 58.9, anti-Soviet agitation propaganda. This was maybe the most constant source of arrests, the steadiest flow. And its scope just ballooned. It wasn't just public speeches. It covered a face-to-face conversation between friends or even between husband and wife or a private letter.
Private conversations.
Yes. The idea of subverting and weakening the government basically covered any idea which did not coincide with the ideas expressed in the newspaper on any particular day. The logic was brutal. He who sings not with us today is against us. Even keeping a private diary could be deemed preparation of literary materials.
So thought crime, essentially.
Pretty much. Then you have 58.11, organization. Now, you'd think this applies to, actual organized group.
Right, like a conspiracy.
But no. The interpretation was so broad that no organization whatever was required. If just two of us had secretly exchanged thoughts, that meant we were the beginnings of an organization, and therefore legally an organization.
Two people talking makes an organization.
According to this logic, yes. Then there's 58.12, failure to make a denunciation. This was seen as a mortal sin with no maximum limit on punishment. It meant he knew and he did not tell, became the equivalent of he did it himself.
Silence equals guilt. That's terrifying.
It fostered an atmosphere of total distrust. And what about treason and espionage? Section 58.1 covered weakening state power or treason to the motherland. It was so broad it could include a starving prisoner, refusing to work, punishable by execution.
Refusing work equals treason.
In that context, yes. And treason itself was elastic. The source gives this example. A Polish guy from Lemberg moves to Vienna. Years later, the Soviets take over Lemberg. He gets 10 years for treason to his motherland, the Ukraine, even though he left long before. Why? Because they decided his intent back then must have been treasonous. And intent, under 58.19, was treated as the crime itself.
Punished for predicted intent.
Exactly. And 58.6, espionage. The interpretation here was so wide, the source jokes the Soviet people must have lived only by espionage. It wasn't just actual spying. It included purges, podozrenie v espionage, suspicion of espionage.
Just suspicion.
Just suspicion. Or even SBPS, sviazi, vyričige, podozrenie v espionage, contacts leading to suspicion of espionage.
Contacts leading to suspicion. How vague can you get?
Right. The example given is, if an acquaintance of your wife happened to use the same seamstress as a foreign diplomat's wife, that could be enough. Arrest. These were known as sticky sections, requiring strict confinement and incessant supervision.
It's hard to even comprehend.
And finally, 58.2, armed rebellion or secession. This applied to any attempt by one of the national republics to leave the USSR because the term force wasn't defined. So, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, Ukrainians trying to assert independence, they got 10, sometimes 25 years into this section.
It sounds less like a law and more like a bureaucratic nightmare deliberately designed to ensnare absolutely everyone.
That's a good way to put it. The damaging steel of Article 58, the source says, was well planned well ahead of time. Even physically, preparations were made. In early 1937, many prisons were re-equipped. They took out individual cots and put in continuous 1- or 2-storied board benches or bunks, packed them in tighter.
Getting ready for the influx.
Exactly. Even the infamous Big House, the NKVD headquarters in Leningrad, was finished in 1934, just in time, the source notes grimly, for Kirov's assassination, which was a major trigger for purges.
So the infrastructure was ready, but what was the actual mechanism driving the mass arrests of 37? Was it just Article 58?
No, the real law, according to the source, wasn't even written down. It was the assignment of quotas, the norms set, the plan.
Arrest quotas.
Yes. Every city, every district, every military unit was assigned a specific quota of arrests to be carried out by a stipulated time.
A target number of enemies to find.
Precisely. There's an example from Tashkent. They were given a quota, send 200. But they didn't have enough political cases. So what do? They reclassified ordinary criminals as Article 58 political offenders. And when that wasn't enough, they just raked in all the gypsy men from 17 to 60 to fulfill the plan.
Just rounded them up off the street.
Seems like it. The cynicism was incredible. The code words used in telegrams for human beings were apparently boxes of soap. One telegrapher figured this out and was promptly arrested himself.
Boxes of soap.
Yeah, and there's that absurd yet terrifying anecdote about the factory director at a party conference. Stalin gets applause, and it goes on and on. For 11 minutes, apparently, because nobody dared to be the first one to stop clapping.
Fear of standing out.
Exactly. This director finally decides someone has to stop, so he sits down. He's arrested that same night. The interrogator's final words to him: don't ever be the first to stop applauding.
Unbelievable.
The source calls it Darwin's natural selection, a way to grind people down with stupidity.
This chilling system, it didn't pause for breath, did it? Not even during something as huge as World War II.
No, absolutely not. The sewage system, it just kept pulsing, kept adapting. From 1941, you get the wave of the encircled.
Who are they?
Soviet soldiers, guys who, through no fault of their own, ended up temporarily surrounded by the Germans during the initial chaotic retreats.
So soldiers trying to get back to their own lines.
Yes. But instead of being welcomed back, they were held on suspicion, disarmed, taken away. Officers from the special branches interrogated them. Many of them became the first wave of traitors of the motherland under a new section, Article 58.1b.
Just for being encircled by the enemy.
Just for that. There was also a general's wave. In the summer of 41, high-ranking officers blamed to the military failures. And even civilians in Moscow, the guilty Muscovites who didn't evacuate when the Germans were approaching, They were arrested for subverting governmental authority or accused of staying on to await the German.
Always finding new enemies. And that old standby anti-Soviet agitation, that kept going too.
Always. Article 58.10 never let up throughout the war. You could get sentenced for anything. Evacuees talking about the horrors of the retreat, that was agitation. People in the rear complaining that rations were meager, slanderous rumors. Soldiers at the front saying the Germans had excellent equipment. That was undermining morale.
Anything negative was potentially criminal.
Pretty much. Then, from 1943 to 1946, another multi-million wave crashes in. This one came from occupied territories and from Europe.
People returning home.
Civilians who had lived under occupation, prisoners of war returning. They were punished simply for having survived under the enemy or for being captured, even if they'd actively resisted the Germans.
Punished for surviving.
Yes. And there's a particularly bizarre group the source calls the Africans.
Africans.
Yeah, it was a nickname.
Yeah.
They were Russian POWs held by the Germans, who were then captured again by the Americans in North Africa. The Americans sent them back to the USSR as allies.
So they should have been welcomed.
You'd think. Instead, they were immediately put behind barbed wire, stripped of everything, and ended up living as forgotten men in Vorkuta, often without even a specific sentence. Just disappeared.
Just vanished into the system.
And then there's the infamous Kadenko group, a Soviet destroyer crew whose ship was damaged, so they were interned in neutral Sweden for the war. Quite comfortably, apparently.
Okay, lucky them, maybe.
Well, when they returned home, they were all sentenced. Oh, why? For telling lovely stories in praise of freedom and good eating in Sweden.
Sentenced for saying life was good elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the story gets weirder. Later, they were pulled out of the camps, cleaned up, fed well, rehearsed.
Fair.
To deny slanderous reports about their imprisonment at a press conference arranged for foreign journalists. They played their part, denied everything, and were then sent straight back to their camps.
That's just grotesquely cynical. So even if you somehow survived your sentence, finished your 10 years, say, freedom wasn't actually guaranteed.
That's the final cruel joke. The source calls it the comedy of the repeaters in 1948-49.
Repeaters?
Yes. Survivors, often from the 1937 purges, people who had somehow endured a decade in the camps and managed to get back home. They were simply rearrested.
On what grounds? New charges?
Without any new charges. They knew the system. They knew the whole way of the cross ahead. The interrogators just asked them, "Are you the one who was in prison?" "Yes. Take 10 more.
Just like that. 10 more years.
Just like that. And this caprice, as the source calls it, also extended to the children of his sworn enemies, Stalin's enemies, presumably. Kids arrested just for growing up, because they might potentially harbor notions of vengeance.
Arresting children for potential future thoughts. And Stalin's final years, they saw yet more new categories of enemies. The paranoia just intensified.
It seems so. From 1950 onwards, you get a wave of Jews arrested as cosmopolitans. Rootless cosmopolitans.
Right, the anti-Semitic campaign.
Yes, leading to the infamous Doctor's Plot. According to Moscow rumors reported in the source, this was a completely fabricated plot intended to incite a great massacre of the Jews.
How?
The plan, supposedly, was that these doctor murderers would be publicly hanged.
Yeah.
This would trigger anti-Jewish riots, a pogrom. Then the government would step in, appearing generous, and save the Jews by removing them en masse to barracks in the Far East. Deportation disguised as rescue.
That's diabolical.
The source claims this was the first plan of his life to fail, suggesting Stalin's death in 1953 intervened before it could be fully carried out.
Wow. What other groups were targeted late on?
Oh, the list continued. Alleged spies, but now usually Anglo-American ones, non-Orthodox religious believers, geneticists who didn't follow Lysenko, students who showed any praise of American technology or democracy, or what was called Todayism toward the West.
Todayism.
Yeah, basically sucking up to the West. And the standard sentence by then had often become 25 years.
25 years.
Yeah, even violating increasingly broad state secrets could get you 15 years. And what counted as a secret, things like district harvest figures, news of epidemics, local factory production numbers, airport locations, transport routes, even revealing the family name of any prisoner was a state secret.
Total information control.
Total. And of course, national groups were still being targeted. Ukrainian nationalists, Lithuanians, Estonians, especially during forced collectivization there, and even Greeks who were exiled en masse in 1948, which the source speculates was evidently the fruit of his personal insanity. So what this whole deep dive really shows us, I think, is this truly chilling system. It wasn't chaotic necessarily. It was driven by consistent cold-blooded planning and never-weakening persistence. Those prisons, they were never empty. They were either full or very, very overcrowded.
It's a really sobering thought, isn't it? While ordinary people, you or I, might have been going about our lives studying, working, maybe on vacation somewhere, maybe just down the street, the Black Mariahs, the prison vans rolled incessantly through the streets, and the gay beastie, the state security men, ironically called carefree guys, knocked at doors and rang doorbells.
Yeah. The history of this sewage system, it really proves, as our source concludes, that the organs always earn their pay. They were always busy.
It leaves you with some profound questions, really. How does a whole society come to accept or maybe even participate in such a pervasive, such an arbitrary system of control?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
And maybe more uncomfortably, what are the subtle echoes, if any, of such a system in our own world today? Even when we think we're completely free, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, what hidden stories are being quietly lived out all around us right now, just waiting for their turn to be properly understood.